That's okay. You're all here with me. It's all good. So I have got a question, and it's huge. I've got something like 6 pages of writing, all in 14 font though, so I can read it. But a lot of writing that I did this morning to answer this question. So I've got my notes with me. So I'm going to read you the question and then I'm going to answer it. And it is a really, really good one. And the reason it's actually a really good one is not just the person has written me a lot, but they've done some personal development and they've given me a sense of what they've read and their sense of themselves, which has given me even more to work with. So let's get started. Dear Elizabeth, I have been single now for about 5 years and to be honest have never been happier. That's good. This comes as no surprise to me, seeing as my previous relationships have been toxic and the men abusive. My first relationship was when I was 15 and it ended some 15 years later. This relationship has taken me almost as many years to recover from, and that would make sense because you were very young when you went into the relationship and you were in your you would have been 30 when you left, so you went a long period of a developmental period with somebody else, and so there's something about reframing and reprocessing all of that time. Anyway, when that relationship ended, I went from one toxic toad to another, love that, until the last 5 or 6 years where I have given men the flick and given myself time to heal and the love and kindness I have wanted to receive from a partner, and I have thrived. I bought a little hobby farm about 5 years ago, which was a dream of mine, and we all have to chase our dreams, really important. And I study full-time externally. I have found it easy to stay single as I'm a homebody. I have come to realise I am an introvert and I really value and need my alone time. It helps me recharge. I know in the past partners have not understood my need to be alone, and I can see how they become anxious and threatened, accusing me of all sorts of things and often saying I just don't put in any effort. I want to be accepted for myself, and that means finding a mature relationship. I know I need to be honest with myself about what I want in a partner and clear about what my needs are. I'm aware I have to negotiate with my partner boundaries, particularly in relation to alone time, so they don't feel hurt, angry, or suspicious about my needs being selfish. In the past, it's been easier to say, I'm busy with family, etc., when really I'm just spending time alone as they don't ever understand. I end up exhausting myself trying to maintain the facade, and I pretty quickly want the relationship over. I become fed up and tired of constantly explaining myself, and I'm feeling drained, particularly guilty, frustrated, and utterly misunderstood. The pattern is that they push for more and more. I feel smothered and it goes to pot and I end it. Or better still, they end it and I run for the hills. I have taken the time to reflect and read up on attachment and have since discovered I have a bit of an avoidant attachment style. Just writing this makes me feel anxious about dating. I feel strength in knowing myself and what I want. My self-worth has increased as has my confidence in spotting a toxic relationship. So I'm definitely getting there. I'm still not sure if I'm ready to date, but let's say if I do in the future, my question is, how do I manage dating while being an introvert with a tendency for avoidance? I can also be anxious at times. I have created a great life for myself. I'm connected to the natural environment and am soon to be starting out in a new and exciting career. And that's awesome. My life is full and wonderful and is on my terms. Should I just stay single and become a cat lady? I'm kind of cool with that idea. All right, now, wow, what a huge question. Now, I am going to answer your main part of the question, which is, how do I manage dating while being an extrovert and a tendency for avoidance? But what I am going to do is I'm going to walk you through some things to do. Yeah, what does avoidant attachment mean? Jessica, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write some blog posts about attachment, and unfortunately they won't go up on at this stage onto the blog until September, but you can Google it and you'll find that there's a lot you can read about it, and I'm going to attempt to explain it here as I answer the question. What I'm looking at doing is having a membership site. That's what I'd really like to do, is have a membership site where even if I write a blog post that goes up on my blog in September, I can set it up in this membership site so you get immediate access to it. So that's what I'm hoping to get to, okay? So just bear with me because it just takes time to set all these things up. All right. So I think it's interesting that you're talking about things going well for you, and yet at the same time talking about a life partner, wanting a life partner, and sitting in this space of, should I be alone or should I continue dating, is kind of where I think you're sitting. And it's interesting that you need to recognize that we're all hardwired to be in a relationship. That's why you're sitting in this space. It's not just the shoulds in this world, and often we find ourselves doing things because we think we should. It's not just the shoulds of this world that kind of sit there and badger us to do what we should be doing rather than being in our integrity. You are internally hardwired to be in a relationship, and I'm going to have some links in this post that'll take you to a whole post on why I know this is true. Why, and I've actually called that post, there is no such thing as codependency. Why I know it's true that we all crave to be with someone. It's just how we're in a relationship that we need to tweak, both in terms of how we are in the world and the sort of partner we choose. And I can tell from your answer that you're on the money with this. This is what you know you need to work on. So something I want you to recognize is there are 4 different types of attachment. So there's secure, where we manage our emotion and we manage our attachment to someone else in healthy ways. There's anxious, okay? An anxious attachment is where our anxiety gets activated when we are anxious about loss of our partner. And this might be because our partner might be threatening to leave overtly, or they might be demonstrating behaviours in the relationship that we think might make us feel they're going to leave. And this can be as much as us acting out our anxiety and being overly active in the relationship in pursuing our partner for reassurance because we're anxious and not managing our fear of loss, and our partner withdrawing because we're taking up too much space in the relationship. And as our partner withdraws, we become more and more anxious and we chase our partner, which makes the situation worse. So that's anxious attachment. Then there is avoidant attachment. And that is where, instead of managing our anxiety by acting out and becoming really verbal and, taking steps to chase our partner in a variety of ways. Don't mind me, I'm sitting here and I'm getting put off because I've actually got a really sore foot. I cut it when I was away and it's just driving me a bit batty. So I'm sorry if I keep lifting my foot off the ground if I seem a bit distracted. So then there's avoidance. So an avoidant person, what they do is they manage their anxiety about their fear of loss in a different way. So they feel the same as the anxious person. They fear loss of the relationship. But when the emotion in the relationship becomes elevated, it's too hard for them to manage it. So what they do is they withdraw away and they repress the emotion. And they dampen it down. And by dampening it down, that might look like sort of not reacting when their anxious partner is having a bit of a meltdown. and not being, and because everything's so dampened down and they just cannot hold the emotion, they then might not respond appropriately when their anxious partner is asking for reassurance. Or they might, and I know the person that's asked this question knows all this, but I'm doing this for the benefit of the other people who are listening. Or they might physically withdraw and say they need time out because it's all too much for them and they need time to process. And so they then step away from the relationship, which then can make the person who has anxious attachment even more upset because they feel that their partner is disengaging from them. The last type of attachment, of course, is fearful avoidant. And this is where a person oscillates between being avoidant, where they withdraw, or highly anxious, where they pursue someone for reassurance. And this often happens when a person's had a traumatic upbringing, where there's been some sort of trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual abuse of some sort. Okay? Now, the attachment that this person has, that's written me the question, has identified is that they have avoidant attachment. Now, it's really important to recognise that we don't necessarily always have the same form of attachment. And you've said that sometimes you can be a bit anxious, and that can happen. And so they're nice boxes that psychologists put things in. We're very good at doing it. So even a secure person who seems to be totally healthy and have no toxicity about them at all might be a bit anxious or a bit avoidant. You know what I mean? And even a person that's avoidant might be a bit anxious. And a person that's anxious might have shades of avoidance, just to make it nice and confusing for you. All right. Now, it's interesting that you can also describe yourself as being introverted. So people are either introverted or extroverted, and it kind of sits with this anxious and avoidant attachment style. Sarah, no, there aren't. And there are some... Look, the current thinking is really around attachment. A lot of psychologists are really in this space, and the most current and trendy couples therapy is emotion-focused therapy, which is totally based on the attachment within the relationship. Having said all that, there are other theories that explain this whole process I'm about to describe to you using different languaging, not the attachment languaging. But they each give us a little different focus on understanding what's going on in a relationship. Because remembering that emotions and feelings and interactions, they're hard to cling on to and they're hard to touch. So we use these theories to try and make sense of them and understand them so that we can shift and change them. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Oh, Jessica, got to love these in-between areas, eh? Yeah, look, personality disorder is a classic example, and I get a bit grumpy because I go online and someone somewhere has worked out that narcissistic personality disorder is a keyword and gets hits. So what they do is they say, is your partner toxic and narcissistic? And I get grumpy because... a person can have narcissistic personality disorder. They can be a pain in the bum, but they're not necessarily toxic. And the reason I know this is from first-hand experience. My stepfather had narcissistic personality disorder. He drove us all insane. He had what you would call compensatory narcissistic disorder, which isn't in the DSM-4, but there is a very famous psychologist who actually broke up all the different types of narcissistic personality disorder in his opinion, and I can't remember his name. And he identified compensatory narcissistic personality disorder, and that was my stepfather to a T. He did not believe he was okay. He had an empty inner core, and so his way of compensating was to go out in the world and tell everybody how fabulous he was. And that's what he did over and over again, even if you'd already heard it 10 million times. And he drove us all absolutely freaking insane doing it. Because he felt he had to tell you. Because he felt like his inner core or his self-worth was so low compared to how he felt he measured up to everyone else, that he had to verbalize all the fabulous things he'd done in order to bring his way of being up to the same level as everybody else's. So once I kind of understood that, there was a part of me that felt really sorry for him. It annoys me, because really when we look at toxic behavior, we need to be understanding the toxic indicators, whether they're in a personality disorder or not. Yeah? Okay. Anyway, I'm off that high horse. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is this idea of being introverted and extroverted. Now, introversion and extroversion, they fit with this idea of this attachment style. Not always, but most of the time. And this is important to remember, that we don't all fit into patterns as neatly as perhaps some of the people writing books and articles would like. However, people who are introverted, what do? They process the world on the inside, and they find their meaning from the inside. So if they go out and they're in the world and they're being extroverted, because that's often what's expected out there in the world, they need time to go away and think on the inside, or they kind of lose the plot a bit and they feel like they're flooded. People who are extroverted, a bit like me, chat, and they're processing the world all the time, and they chat in order to get a response from people on the outside world, and that helps them process what's going on. So they don't necessarily need time out. Or no, I'll phrase that differently. They don't think they need time out. And my greatest mentors have been introverted, and they'll look at me and they'll say, "Elizabeth, slow down," which has been very helpful to me, I have to admit. So, it's a little bit about recognizing that that's another pattern that happens in relationships. And 99.9% of the time, even if I put the attachment across to one side and I don't think about it, when a couple sits down in front of me, I can see that there is one person who is extroverted and one person who is introverted. And in a healthy relationship, each takes a little bit of the other. It's when we get caught in these fixed, entrenched patterns that we find ourselves dancing. So what can be the dance that happens between, say, an introverted and extroverted person? And this person would probably find, because they've identified themselves as introverted, that they would be so attracted to extroverted people. And in fact, if I'm honest, because I'm an extroverted person, most of my friends are introverted. Once I had that self-awareness, I'm really aware of that. I choose people around me who let me talk while they listen. Which is interesting for me as a therapist, because I've had to learn to sit back and shut up. Personal growth. And tells you that you can be in your non-preferred way of being. So introverts can be extroverted and extroverts can be introverted, just to make things confusing. And that's what facilitates our personal growth. So what is the dance that happens when we know this kind of pattern happens, where maybe you get an anxious person and an avoidant person coming, who with that style of attachment coming together, remembering that there's shades of it, but as a general rule, that's what we see, or an introverted or an extroverted person coming together. What do we see? Well, we see a relationship dance. And what happens is, when either party feels that they cannot cope with the emotional landscape of the relationship and their fear of loss is activated, they move into their ways of coping, their preferred ways of coping. And their preferred way of coping may well be that a person with anxious attachment will chase their partner. They might invade their personal space. They might refuse to allow them to have time away or time on their own. They might not be able to cope if they do take that time on their own, and they might ring them even though they've been asked not to for a certain period of time, just to give that person space to think. They might talk a lot, or they might pick a fight and try and get a reaction. Yeah? So it's important to remember that often when we're arguing, it's not what we're arguing about, whether we've loaded or unloaded the dishwasher, but the process. And that's what I'm describing here. Your introverted person feels exactly the same way. They have fear of loss, but for them, when the emotion bubbles up inside them, they can't process it. It's too hard. And they need time out, because often they're introverted as well. And so they withdraw or try and retreat out of the relationship, or as the person is trying to get a reaction, desperately trying to get a reaction out of them, they will be frozen. Sometimes in fear, depending on what their upbringing's been in terms of managing when there's angst in arguments that happen. And they're frozen and they don't give a reaction, which makes the person who's anxious try and get a reaction even more and maybe yell a little bit louder and push a little bit harder. I've been guilty of that, and push a little bit harder. And so the person who's avoidant then says, ooh, they feel their emotion coming up. So they may actually even exit the argument without warning. They might refuse to speak. A lot of things happen. And when these patterns become toxic, where they become in the extreme and they become abusive of our partner, that's when we describe, abusive patterns. You can have a healthy relationship that dances like this, and the dance just isn't in awareness. A healthy relationship is when that dance can be brought into awareness and it can be managed effectively. So it's important to kind of recognize that, when I've taught this, when I have done couples workshops with Relationships Australia, that when I have taught this, a lot of couples have sat there and said, oh, that's me, the woman being the anxious pursuer, and oh, that's me, the husband being the avoidant withdrawer. And invariably, there will be a couple in the group who feel very alienated because they're not like that at all, and maybe the pattern's reversed. So again, don't genderify it. If you're listening to me as a woman thinking, that's me, I chase and get anxious, be careful not to genderify it, because some people will be the reverse. Okay? And this person who's written to me, it's clear they're a woman because they want to be a cat lady, and they're saying to me that they are introverted avoidant. So it's important to be aware that the sort of partner that you might attract is someone who is someone who is, sorry, I'm just reading comments, is someone who is extroverted and maybe could be anxious. Not all extroverted people are anxious. Some are avoidant, but generally, it sits in those patterns. Okay. So it's important. Now, where am I up to with all my notes? So if you understand that there is this dancing pattern that happens in a relationship, how can you interrupt it? Well, it's about both parties coming into awareness. And this is where couples therapy can be very, very helpful, because it brings those patterns into awareness. And what has to happen is the anxious person has to be able to manage their anxiety without pursuing their partner. That means they have to be able to create a safe space when there's an argument without flooding their partner, so that their partner can actually have space to think and speak. Incredibly important. And it's important that the person who is avoidant, with the avoidant anxiety, and introverted will share and will speak and will resolve the argument. Because if that trust that the anxious person will step back and the avoidant person will step forward, nothing will be resolved at all. So it's very important that you recognize that that's the pattern, and you can often draw it. It often sits again in this cycle of violence I've been teaching you. This anger, pause, pursuit, honeymoon, build up, and goes around. And that's another way that we describe the dance. There are many, many, many different theories that you can learn as you dip into this work. So it is really important that you recognize the dance and your own particular steps in the dance, and you recognize the trust that needs to be built to break it. So that is my long, short answer to attachment styles and relationship patterns that's been touched on in this question for the benefit of everybody listening. And I certainly hope that it's helped the person have a little bit of deeper understanding who has asked this question. Now for the second half of the question, which is, how do I manage my emotion if I'm going to go out dating, because I'm introverted and I'm avoidant and I need to know what I can do to manage myself? Okay. The very first thing is you need to recognize how you manage emotion and what triggers your emotion. Really, really important to recognize that your level of distress is exactly the same as the person who's anxious, who is actively and extrovertedly acting out. And this is really important for people who are anxious extroverts to recognize that if just because their partner's not speaking doesn't mean to say they aren't dying inside. And we know from research that they've measured elevation levels, and people that can look incredibly calm are beside themselves on the inside. Okay, so very important to recognize that. So when you recognize that what you do when you become distressed is you dampen down, is that as you feel yourself telling yourself, it's not that bad, I need time out, this is him going a bit loopy, I need to separate myself because he's crazy, I need to think. This is your dampening down. So recognizing what's triggering it, and it will be anxiety about the relationship in some way, and that's about your own family template. And then recognize your own triggers and things you do to dampen it down so you can interrupt it and say, hang on a minute, I'm going into that pattern. So that's the first stage. Recognition is 90% there. So easy to say, so hard to do. So hard to do. Because it means looking at ourselves. And believe me, I'm a psychologist and I can't counsel myself. I need to go and have help every now and then because I can't think straight about my own stuff. And yet I can sit here and dissect everybody else's. So, it's really important that you just keep working on that. And as you work on it, you'll get little bits will become clearer and clearer. I want you to think about your self-reliance. People who have avoidant attachment, the avoidant attachment comes from a parent who perhaps has met your logistical and physical needs, but hasn't necessarily met your psychological needs. And so because you haven't always, you haven't had that sort of emotional care, you become very emotionally self-reliant. And this can mean that you start to use that whenever you feel anxious. You'll go into your shell and you'll say, it's all right, I can do it all by myself. And the problem is when you do that, you cut yourself away from people and you cut out the intimacy with your partner. So when you feel yourself doing that, it's another trigger that you need to really identify and say, now hang on a minute, why am I feeling the need to withdraw and look after myself because I feel like no one else will? What's that about? If that's a garbage truck, I'm going to scream. I think it's a builder's truck. Anyway, eventually they will stop this building at the back just in time for me maybe to start some repairs and renovation on my weatherboard house. And how I'm going to talk to you then, I don't know. I've already started talking to the first person that's come in to do some work, and yes, I'm going to have to somehow put myself in a room or something. Anyway, we'll get to that when the time comes. So you need to recognize that if you are fiercely self-reliant, and it feels like you might be, because you've chosen to go off into the country and buy yourself a little hobby farm, which you've always wanted to do, and you're kind of toying with being a cat lady on your own, solving your own stuff, that tells me you're fiercely self-reliant. You need to challenge that. Because when you do that, it makes it very frustrating for somebody to actually engage with you. Incredibly, very, very hard for them to connect with you. When you give somebody a chance to actually help you and connect with you, you make yourself vulnerable. That brings on the very anxiety of connecting with someone else and can activate our fear of loss. So what you have to do is to step into the stuff you don't want to do. in order to be in a relationship, because you can't build trust and you can't give someone the gift of friendship unless you do that. I'm just every now and then looking down, checking my notes, because this is all quite complex stuff to make sure I remember to tell you everything. I find if I don't, I get off the call and I realise I forget to tell you things. All right. So having a friendship with someone is a good way for you to start a relationship with someone and build up slowly into that trust space. Think about your self-reliance. If you don't reach out to other people, I've written that twice. I have. Okay, next one. I want you to think about your expectations of romantic partners. It is really important that you understand toxic behavior. I'm not minimizing that for a moment. You know that is one of the things that I push very hard for everyone to understand. But be careful of your expectations. You know, you move so you can avoid noise, and then they do things. I'm right on the edge of my property. Behind me you can see the fence onto the street. And so what do? They bring a truck. It's really starting to annoy me. It's gone on ever since last November. This has gone on for. Anyway. So think about your expectations of romantic partners. So I want you to think about using your expectations as an excuse to push your partner away. Ha ha ha. Really big. I am. Driving me a bit batty, I have to tell you. It's gone on they've done a massive knockdown and extension, and it's just gone on and on and on and on a really long time. And I haven't sort of shown you my garden, but I have a really lovely garden, and I really like coming out here for breaks through the day. I don't tend to sit out here and work. I find it, you know, a little bit much to sit outside all the time, because I get a bit, you know, the heat affects me, especially in summer. But I do like to come out here every now and then and have a break, and I like a bit of quietness, even though I'm an extroverted person. There you are. And they're just invading my noise space a bit, and there's nothing I can do about it. The council would say to me, how many decibels is that? Well, it's within the limits and blah blah blah. I can't be bothered. Anyway, so you need to be careful, getting back to the question, that when you feel anxious with your partner, that you don't start to put these unrealistic expectations in place, so that when you when you're wanting to kind of withdraw, that you use those as an excuse. Because if you do that and you start withdrawing with unrealistic expectations, what will happen is your partner will start to get really anxious that you keep separating from them. It'll activate their fear of loss, and it'll make them pursue you even harder. So you need to be actively participating in the relationship, talking about how you feel. This is really important. As difficult as it is, you need to be talking about your feelings, so that you fill a little bit of the space, so that the anxious person doesn't start over-functioning and pursuing you. Be really careful that you don't interpret people's behaviour in negative ways and use that as a way of justifying separateness. I don't know whether any of these, that you identify with any of these or not. But again, that helps you to justify withdrawing. If you find yourself having these thoughts about your partner's faults, try to really, slow yourself down and think about whether you're being reasonable, and recognize you can still love someone even if they're totally batshit crazy. All right? Think about who you're choosing as a partner. This is a good one. Think about the attachment style of your partner. You're looking for someone with secure attachment. Now, look, as I said before, even people who have secure attachment can be a little bit anxious. I probably sit in that space. I like to think, and sometimes I'm just really anxious and I don't manage myself at all. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who's able to model secure attachment to you. And what happens is, in a relationship, if someone who has avoidant or anxious attachment forms a relationship with someone who's mostly secure, that secure person models how to be in a relationship in a secure way, and so then that gives you something that you can start to model yourself, which then takes you into a healthy space. So in a healthy relationship, what happens is each takes a little bit of the other. So my partner, for example, I would describe him as probably being introverted avoidant, because we're in the classic pattern. And so he tries to take a little bit of me and talk a little bit about himself and where he's at, and he finds it incredibly hard to do. And of course, when he doesn't do it, I get a bit anxious and I start to say, what's happening? Are you all right? Are you okay? You know, all that stuff. So having that self-awareness is really important for managing the relationship. One of the things he's told me that he finds very helpful in terms of connecting with me and not going sort of into his own space is that he will tell me a story. So if I say to him, how was work today? If he says to me, good, I just want to shoot him. In his own head, good means because he processes on the inside, and he forgets that it has to come out of his mouth like an extroverted person, or I'm not going to get it. So he will say something like, at work today, I had a chat to Fred and he was saying that they're a bit worried because X, Y, and Z might be happening. And even though to him it's boring because he sort of already, it's like he's working in a corporate environment and he already knows what's going on and all of that stuff. To me, it makes me feel like I'm included, and he thinks it's important that I know all this stuff. And he does try to weave some feelings into it. He finds it very difficult. He's a person of high logic. He's a computer analyst. I mean, what more could you ask for with a psychologist? Could we have married anything more opposite? And yet our relationship is, it's been highly successful. We married very young, much to the trepidation of our parents and everyone around us. And we're still together. So, there's no rhyme or reason. I've tried that. I tried looking at personality types, and I was going to write a book about personality types and recommending certain personality types should go with certain personality types for the most success in a relationship. And I threw up my hands in horror because actually it's pretty impossible to write and I discovered that my husband and I completely and utterly on every psychological level, test, theory, whatever you could think of, completely broke the mold. And in fact, the Myers-Briggs that I wanted to base this on, basically there was one person who's written a book, I can't remember who, I think it's Kersey and Bates, Please Understand Me, who've tried to write a book reflective of the personality types that go together, found that basically found that ENFP and ISTJ should not even be together, that we'd exhaust each other and we would never, ever be able to be in a relationship. And we've successfully been together for a really long time and had 2 children. So I gave up on all that as a bad idea. Anyway, so think about the partner you choose. Make a relationship gratitude list. And look, I think this is a really awesome thing to do, whether you are anxious, secure, healthy, or whatever. Make a relationship gratitude list. Write down all the things you love about your partner. And don't just write them down and internally process them. Tell your partner. And look, I'm a great one for planning what you're going to say, especially for those of you, even me. Look, I'm pretty articulate, but even I get tongue-tied sometimes, and it's great. The more preparation you can do, and the more you can understand yourself, and the more you can understand the things about your partner that they may not have even thought about that you love about them, the better. I hope you can see me. The light in something really weird. Oh, whoops. In my garden. The light's doing something weird. I hope you can all see me, and I can hardly see your comments, so I don't know what's going on. Anyway, so make sure that you tell your partner. This is a great strategy for a person who's a little bit introverted, doesn't speak a lot, and who might also be a bit avoidant and inwardly processing. When you fill up your partner's love tank, thank you, Sarah. It's something that my partner and I do together, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What was I going to say? It fills your partner's love tank, and it increases their capacity to manage the things about you that they struggle with. Incredibly important. If you think about love as like a petrol tank inside you, and I know I've talked about love languages before, and if you want me to do it again, just send me a message, and I'll do a talk about love languages. In fact, I might even do a blog post about love languages, and I can credit the gorgeous Gary Chapman, and I'll give you some ideas of different ways to speak the different love languages. That might be a really good one. But it builds up. If you think about love inside you, this truck as like a petrol tank, and you keep that petrol tank nice and full in your partner. And often pictures like this of how relationships work are really powerful for people to understand what you're doing and why I'm asking you to do it, is that if the love inside you is like a petrol tank and you keep it full, it means that you can start to burn that petrol in other ways. Not meaning that I'm giving you an excuse to be toxic, but it just gives a little bit of slack in the relationship when things go wrong. It builds resilience. Not necessarily the capacity to endure you being toxic or abusing your relationship. I'm not giving permission for that. I want to make that clear. Think of projects you can do together. So our garden, my husband's and my garden, is a project we do together because we don't have a lot in common. And he doesn't have a lot of hobbies. He sort of, he does a lot of the things I do, which is not really good, but it's one of the things that, we struggle with in our relationship, and it has its positives and negatives. It means that if I want to have a certain hobby, he joins me in it. But then I get a bit frustrated sometimes because I'm the person that thinks of all the things we do in our relationship together. So, sharing a little bit of my space and letting you know that although I talk about him as Prince Charming, he's my Prince Charming, and he might not be the Prince Charming that would be suitable for you. Everybody finds their own Prince Charming, and every relationship has its challenges. That's really, really important for you to recognize that as well. No relationship is perfect. My phone screen is now black, so I apologize if I cannot see your comments. I don't know why my phone is doing that, and I really hope that you can see me. Okay. So it's really important to recognize that that you're on the right track with recognizing who you are and how you are in a relationship, and how you choose the partners you do, and recognizing behaviors that are toxic and behaviors that are healthy. Huge, big ticks. Big ticks. The next thing is recognizing it in yourself. That's really hard. The mirror on the wall thing. Who's the fairest of them all? The real looking within and seeing what's not okay. And then the next thing, which is even harder, is actioning it all. I can't tell you whether you should be a cat lady for the rest of your life and live on your own, or whether you should have a relationship with someone or not. It's the angle of the sun. I hope you can see me, that's all. I can't tell you what to do. But what I can say is that everyone, I'm going to say everyone. I mean, look, books I've read said with the rare exception, because, well, people like to always give themselves an out. And I'll say the exception is very, very rare. And even in your question, you're showing me that there is that part of you that yearns to find somebody. And so if you do make that decision to be on your own, I want you to know that yearning to have someone in your life is not going to go away. It's something you're going to have to manage. And what's important is to recognize that you should not give in to those feelings and pursue an unhealthy relationship just for the sake of appeasing feelings of being on your own that are too difficult to manage, regardless of whether you manage them in an anxious way and your emotion bubbles up and over and out, and you act out and you pursue somebody or whatever, or you do what you're describing in your question, where you repress your emotion and dampen it down and withdraw. So very important to recognize that those feelings will always be there, and it's important to manage those feelings so that and manage them in healthy ways so that you can make healthy life choices, not just with relationships, but even with the friends that you have in your life.